Hello, my friend. Welcome. This is a place where history meets rest, where we wander through the long, forgotten corridors of time in a calm, soothing way. If you're new here, know that these historical stories are designed to help you drift into sleep, while your subconscious mind travels back into worlds that no longer exist. Tonight we'll journey together into a time before humans, a world alive with strange beasts, ancient forests, and oceans filled with predators so bizarre that they hardly seem real. And where shall we begin? Let's let the clock wind back. Not just hundreds of years, not just thousands, but hundreds of millions, to an Earth unrecognizable to us. The year, if you want to call it that, is somewhere around 350 million years ago. We are in the late Paleozoic era, in what geologists like to call the Carboniferous period. The continents are not yet the familiar puzzle pieces you know. They are slowly drifting, gathering themselves toward a future collision that will one day form the supercontinent Pangaea. For now, much of what is North America and Europe is covered in vast, swampy lowlands, steaming and humid, the air rich in oxygen, almost 35%, far higher than today's 21%. That little atmospheric detail changed everything. It turned insects into giants, amphibians into rulers, and forests into green cathedrals that reached higher than your imagination. The first thing you notice in this ancient world is the air. Heavy, thick, almost syrupy with moisture. Breathing it feels different. And for the creatures here, it fueled possibilities that Earth has never repeated. Dragonflies with wingspans wider than hawks drift lazily overhead, their compound eyes catching the watery light. Amphibians the size of cars squat beside murky pools, their ribbed bodies sliding into the water with a slow ripple. And across the forest floor, something far stranger moves. A millipede stretching 8 feet long, armored in dark plates, dozens of legs rippling in perfect wave-like coordination. This is the reign of the giants of the swamp, Megafauna, the massive dragonfly, labyrinthodonts, the crocodile-like amphibians, and Arthropleura, the endless centipede that looks like the product of a nightmare. And yet, to them, this world is ordinary. The forests themselves are strange to our eyes. There are no flowering plants yet, no grasses, no fruit trees or fields of wheat. Instead, the world is draped in lycopsid trees, relatives of today's club mosses, but swollen to the size of towers. Trunks rising 100 feet high, patterned with diamond-shaped scars where leaves once grew. Their roots dig into soggy, coal-rich soils, and above, horsetail plants the height of buildings sway in the damp breeze. This is a green world, but alien. The smell is damp, fungal, earthy, a perpetual rot feeding perpetual growth. Predation here is no less strange. In the seas swim armored titans. Dunkleosteus, the placoderm fish, lurks with its jaw plates sharpened to guillotine edges. It is 20 feet long, heavily armored, and capable of snapping through bone in a fraction of a second. Imagine swimming in that ocean, if you dared, and knowing that somewhere below you, a living fortress is waiting. Out of that long silence, the earth began again. The Permian devastation had scoured life nearly to the bone, wiping away almost everything that had once dominated the land and seas. Yet life is stubborn, resilient in ways that even mass extinction cannot erase. For millions of years, the planet was a quieter, emptier place. Great forests had thinned, plains lay barren. Rivers carried silt where once teemed fish and amphibians. The bones of vanished creatures lay bleaching in the sun, silent memorials to a world that had collapsed under its own weight. But the story of life does not end in silence. It reshapes, it experiments, it fills in the gaps left behind. And so, as the Triassic period unfolded, a new age began. The Earth itself looked different now. All the continents, once scattered across the globe, had pressed together into one colossal landmass. Pangaea, a single continent stretching almost from pole to pole, ringed by a global ocean. It was magnificent in scale, but merciless in climate. The interior of Pangaea baked under searing heat, vast deserts with red sands and little water, while at the coasts and edges of the supercontinent, seasonal monsoons drowned the land in torrential rains. This alternating rhythm of parched drought and flooding rain would define the Triassic world. It was a crucible, harsh, unpredictable, but full of opportunity. In this harsh setting, new creatures began to appear. Strange, small, resilient beings that would go on to shape the history of life in ways the Permian giants never could. The survivors of the extinction had been mostly small reptiles, amphibians, and a few stubborn synapsids. Those mammal-like reptiles that had once ruled the Permian world. Gone were the enormous gorgonopsids, the saber-toothed hunters of the earlier era. Gone were the massive parasaurs and countless lineages of amphibians. In their absence, smaller lineages darted into the gaps. A new class of reptiles, the archosaurs, began their quiet rise. The word archosaur simply means ruling reptiles, and it's exactly what they would become. These creatures were the ancestors of crocodiles, pterosaurs, and dinosaurs. In their early Triassic form, they were experimental. Some were long-legged and fast, some squat and armored, some upright and lean. It was as if evolution had emptied its entire sketchbook and started doodling new forms across the hot landscapes of Pangaea. One of the first great archosaur predators was Postosuchus. Imagine something that looks like a crocodile that had decided legs were better than a belly crawl. Sleek, muscular, four-legged, but capable of rearing on its hind limbs. It was not yet a dinosaur, but it hunted like one, prowling the floodplains for prey, snapping with jaws lined in serrated teeth. These were the terrors of the early Triassic world. But predators are nothing without prey. And the prey, too, was evolving. Early herbivores like Plateosaurus, a distant ancestor of the later sauropods, began to grow larger. These creatures were not yet the titans of the Jurassic, but they were getting there. Imagine a lizard-like body stretched tall with a long neck, shuffling through ferns, stripping leaves with jaws not yet built for efficiency, but enough to make a living. Herds of Plateosaurus wandered the floodplains, their footprints pressed into mud that would one day fossilize, preserved as stone memories. And among them, darting smaller, quicker, lighter, the first true dinosaurs. They were not yet the thunderous beasts of children's books. They were more modest, cat-sized or dog-sized at best. One of the earliest we know is Eoraptor, a quick little hunter from what is now South America. It ran on two legs, teeth sharp, hands grasping, tail stiff for balance. It was nimble and opportunistic, feeding on insects, small reptiles, maybe even scavenging meat left by bigger predators. If you saw it today, you might not even recognize it as a dinosaur, more like a chicken-sized reptile darting nervously in the underbrush. But in those small steps lay the future rulers of the planet. The Triassic was nothing if not experimental. Crocodile relatives grew armored backs and spiny tails, some even walking upright like mock dinosaurs. Etosaurus lumbered around looking like a spiked armadillo. Meanwhile, the skies began to fill with new experiments. Pterosaurs, the first vertebrates to truly master powered flight, unfurled wings of skin stretched over elongated fingers. They were fragile, delicate, their bones thin as paper, yet they glided above rivers and coastlines, hunting fish and insects. Their shapes varied wildly. Some had short wings and long tails tipped with diamond-shaped flares. Others already stretched into wingspans wider than a man. The Triassic skies must have been uncanny, filled with creatures that seemed stitched together from lizard, bat, and bird. And in the seas, experiments too. Ichthyosaurs, streamlined and dolphin-like, chased fish through the warm waves. Their bodies were elegant, sleek, built for speed, their eyes huge for seeing in the deep. Alongside them swam nothosaurs, semi-aquatic reptiles that paddled along coastlines, half in, half out of the water. These seas, once emptied by the Permian collapse, were alive again, bubbling with new predators and prey. The land, though harsh, was slowly greening again. Ferns and conifers spread, cycads rose in stiff groves, and flowering plants were just beginning their first quiet experiments. Rivers wound across Pangaea's surface, cutting through red sand deserts, flooding plains where life could cluster and thrive. In these oases, the first communities of Triassic life formed. Predators and prey, herbivores and omnivores, all weaving together into ecosystems that would lay the groundwork for the dinosaur age. Still, for tens of millions of years, dinosaurs were not the dominant force. They were background players, smaller, quicker, overshadowed by crocodile-line archosaurs like Postosuchus. But nature was giving dinosaurs the tools they would need for the future: upright posture, lungs more efficient than their competitors, growth that was rapid and adaptable. These features quietly sharpened them, preparing them for the moment when fate would tip the balance. And fate, as it often does, came in the form of yet another extinction. Toward the end of the Triassic, about 201 million years ago, the Earth convulsed again. This time, it was not an asteroid, but the Earth itself tearing apart. As Pangaea began to rift, immense volcanic eruptions split the land, spewing lava and toxic gases into the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide levels soared, temperatures swung, and ecosystems cracked under the stress. Many archosaurs vanished, whole branches pruned from the tree of life. The great crocodile-line predators dwindled, and in the quiet left behind, dinosaurs surged. This was their moment. The survivors of a harsh crucible now stepped into dominance. From small beginnings, they spread across the continents, diversifying into forms both familiar and bizarre. Some stretched into enormous, long-necked sauropods, their size unmatched by anything before. Others honed sharp claws and teeth into predators that could rival any that had stalked the Permian or Triassic plains. Pause for a moment. Imagine what this would have looked like, not in hindsight, but to any living thing at the time. For millions of years, life had lurched from one disaster to the next, from the suffocating heat of the Permian to the fiery volcanoes of the Triassic. Creatures rose, thrived, and vanished almost as quickly. And yet, here was a lineage, small, agile, unremarkable at first, that would ride those storms and turn into the greatest dynasty Earth had ever seen. When you picture the Triassic, do not imagine endless armies of thunderous giants. Imagine instead a planet still healing, still experimenting. Creatures awkward and strange, reptiles with armor like shingles, others with wings like leather kites, others sprinting upright like nervous birds. A world harsh and desolate at its center, lush and vibrant at its edges. A world on the cusp of handing the throne to the dinosaurs. And the irony is that even then, no creature knew what was coming next. The Triassic world must have felt eternal, just as the Permian once had. Yet time, in its slow unfurling, was already preparing the next upheaval, the next experiment, the next dynasty. The world breathes differently now. The Triassic has burned itself out, and with it, many of the competitors that once jostled with dinosaurs for space. The great crocodile-line predators are shadows of their former selves, their numbers thinned, their dominance gone. The air still smells faintly of sulfur, the scars of volcanic upheaval carved deep into the land, but slowly, patiently, the planet settles into a new rhythm. And the stage is ready for the dinosaurs to take their bow, not as bit players this time, but as the rulers of Earth. The Jurassic period begins like a quiet overture. The continents are still clustered together, though the seams are starting to strain. Pangaea, once a seamless supercontinent, begins to crack at its edges. Rifts open where the Atlantic will one day swell, volcanic ridges splitting seas, and inland valleys forming where oceans will eventually flood. For now, though, the land is still vast and joined. And on that land, dinosaurs begin their grand experiment in size. Picture a forest of conifers and cycads, trees tall but stiff, their branches bearing scale-like leaves instead of the wide canopies we know today. Ferns carpet the forest floor, and horsetails rise in dense clusters along riverbanks. Insects buzz, cicadas whine, and dragonflies skim over ponds. And through this prehistoric greenery moves something astonishing. Not small, not tentative, not modest, like the little Eoraptor of the Triassic, but long-necked, towering, striding on four pillar-like legs, its tail swaying behind like a balancing beam. This is the age of the sauropods. One of the earliest to define this new dynasty was the mighty Brachiosaurus. Imagine an animal as tall as a 5-story building, its neck rising almost vertically like a giraffe on steroids. Unlike most sauropods, which held their necks more horizontally, Brachiosaurus lifted its head high into the treetops, stripping leaves that no other animal could reach. Its nostrils sat high on its head near the top of its skull, giving it an almost comical expression, as if it were peering down at the world with bemused detachment. A single step shook the earth, its weight pressing deep tracks into mud that would harden into stone and endure for millions of years. And yet Brachiosaurus was only one note in a symphony of giants. Diplodocus, with its whip-like tail, stretched to lengths of over 80 feet. Its body low, its neck long and flexible, it could sweep entire swaths of vegetation into its mouth like a living crane. Apatosaurus, once confusingly called Brontosaurus, rumbled through floodplains in herds, their sheer mass enough to flatten forests into open corridors. Each of these creatures required unimaginable amounts of food, stripping tons of foliage each day, their stomachs fermenting vats that churned plant matter into energy. To stand near them would have been to feel small in a way we can barely comprehend today. And they did not walk alone. Around their great legs scurried smaller dinosaurs, opportunists living in the shadow of giants. Ornithischians, the bird-hipped dinosaurs, diversified here, some growing plates, spikes, and armor to ward off predators. Stegosaurus was among the strangest, with its double row of plates rising like sails along its back, and its tail tipped with 4 long spikes that could puncture the hide of even the boldest hunter. Its brain, infamously, was tiny compared to its bulk, but it didn't need intelligence to survive. It needed deterrence. and few predators would risk a swipe from that lethal tail. Predators, of course, evolved in step with their prey. As the sauropods grew larger, so too did the theropods, the meat-eating branch of the dinosaur family tree. Allosaurus emerged as one of the top hunters of the Jurassic. Sleek, muscular, bipedal, standing over 30 feet long with jaws lined in serrated teeth, it hunted with precision. Fossil evidence suggests it may have worked in groups, ambushing sauropods or targeting the weak and young. Its claws, 3 to a hand, curved like sickles, capable of raking through flesh. Allosaurus was not as large as the later Tyrannosaurus, but in its time, it was no less terrifying. And yet, for all their size and savagery, dinosaurs were still animals. They lived in complex worlds. They nested, they grew, they aged, they died. Fossilized nesting grounds show rows of carefully placed eggs, suggesting some species returned year after year to the same places to lay their young. Some may have guarded their nests, while others left their eggs to the mercy of the environment. Hatchlings scrambled through ferns, vulnerable to predators, their survival hinging on instinct and luck. And just as today, many would never see adulthood. But enough survived that the lineage carried on, growing stronger with each generation. The climate of the Jurassic was warmer than ours, humid, and rich in carbon dioxide. The air itself fed forests that grew denser and taller, and in turn, those forests fed the sauropods. It was a feedback loop. More plants, more herbivores, more predators, more diversity. The earth hummed with life. The seas, too, filled with giants. Plesiosaurs, with their long necks and paddle-like limbs, glided through shallow seas, snatching fish with needle-like teeth. Pliosaurs, their shorter-necked, bulkier cousins, grew massive jaws that could crush almost anything they caught. These marine reptiles were not dinosaurs, but they shared the stage, turning the Jurassic oceans into hunting grounds as terrifying as the plains above. Above it all, the skies shifted into new shapes. Pterosaurs grew larger, stranger, more specialized. Some had crests rising like sails from their heads, brightly colored perhaps, used for display. Others developed wingspans wider than small aircraft, though the true giants of the skies would not come until later in the Cretaceous. For now, the skies shimmered with smaller flyers, swooping and diving, the first hints of what would one day evolve into true birds. Archaeopteryx, discovered in limestone quarries in Germany, bridges this moment. With feathers, wings, and the ability to glide but still bearing teeth and clawed fingers, it was a creature straddling two worlds, the world of reptile and the world of bird. Pause here and picture it. A warm Jurassic plain, herds of Diplodocus stretching out of sight, tails swaying like pendulums. In the distance, Stegosaurus shuffling, its plates catching the sun. Overhead, pterosaurs wheel in the air, their shadows racing across the ground, and lurking at the edges, Allosaurus waiting for the weak to falter. It is a world of scale, rhythm, and abundance, a world where dinosaurs are no longer marginal, no longer experiments, but the undisputed rulers. But ruling the Earth was not just about size or strength. It was about adaptability. Dinosaurs thrived in deserts, in forests, in floodplains, in mountains. Their body plans were astonishingly versatile. Some remained small, darting insectivores, quick and light, blending into undergrowth. Others grew armored hides, bristling spikes, or ornate crests. Their lungs, efficient and bird-like, allowed them to process oxygen better than most reptiles. Their growth rates, fast and energy-hungry, let them outpace competitors. It was as if evolution had stumbled upon a near-perfect formula for survival, and once unleashed, it spread like fire across the globe. Meanwhile, mammals, yes, our tiny ancestors, were scurrying at the feet of giants. Small, nocturnal, insect-eating, they survived in shadows. They did not challenge the dinosaurs. Instead, they waited. For now, the world belonged to the giants. But tucked in burrows and trees, our lineage endured. The Jurassic rolled on for millions of years, a long stretch of stability compared to the chaos of earlier ages. Ecosystems matured, niches filled, lineages diversified. It was an age of expansion. The continents were still joined enough that dinosaurs spread far and wide, but cracks deepened. The Atlantic widened, seas seeped into rift valleys, climates shifted at the edges of continents. Still, the dinosaurs adapted, growing new forms for every environment. By the end of the Jurassic, the stage was set for the next act, the Cretaceous, where dinosaurs would diversify further, reaching both their peak and, eventually, their fall. But for now, picture the Jurassic in all its fullness. The Earth alive with thunderous footsteps, forests swaying under long necks, skies streaked with wings, seas churning with reptilian hunters. A world vibrant, alien, but somehow familiar in its rhythms of life and death. And here's the quiet irony. For all their might, their grandeur, their dominance, the dinosaurs did not know this was only a chapter. They did not know the clock was ticking. To them, this was eternal, just as we, today, believe our world will stretch on unchanged. But deep time whispers otherwise, so drift with me here. Imagine lying beneath a Jurassic canopy, listening to the rumble of giants in the distance, the splash of marine reptiles offshore, the flutter of wings overhead, a world vast and eternal, and yet, as always, only temporary. The Earth turns again. Millions of years pass in silence. Continents drift a little farther apart. Seas rise and fall. And suddenly, we are in a new age. The Cretaceous period. A time when dinosaurs not only thrived, but when they seemed to become every possible version of themselves. Armored and spiked, feathered and sleek, massive and thunderous, or small and quick, darting through ferns like shadows. If the Jurassic was the rehearsal, the Cretaceous was the full performance. By now, the Atlantic Ocean is widening, carving a blue ribbon between what will become Africa and South America. The continents, once part of a single landmass, are drifting into recognizable shapes. North America, split by an inland sea, looks like two slender islands. Europe is a scatter of tropical archipelagos. Asia is a sprawling mystery, its interior plains stretching forever. And through all of these landscapes, dinosaurs evolve into astonishing forms, filling every corner of the ecological stage. Let's start with the land giants. Sauropods, those long-necked behemoths, continue their reign, but they are joined by stranger cousins. Argentinosaurus from South America pushes the limits of size itself. Imagine a creature over 100 feet long, weighing perhaps 70 tons, its neck rising like a living crane, its tail sweeping the earth like a pendulum of muscle and bone. To walk beside it would have been to stand in the shadow of a moving mountain. Herds of these sauropods roamed floodplains where conifers and cycads still grew, devouring whole groves of vegetation each day. The ground must have trembled beneath them, a soundscape of groaning earth and swaying trees. But the Cretaceous was not only about size, it was about innovation. Herbivores diversified in wild directions. Take the hadrosaurs, or duck-billed dinosaurs. They developed elaborate crests on their heads, hollow tubes of bone that may have functioned as trumpets. A Parasaurolophus could produce low, resonant calls that echoed across the floodplains like foghorns in a world of giants. Entire herds may have moved together, their voices blending into a prehistoric symphony. It wasn't just survival, it was communication, culture of a kind, passed through sound and resonance. Then there were the ceratopsians, horned dinosaurs. They began modestly, with smaller frills and bumps, but by the late Cretaceous they had evolved into some of the most spectacular animals to ever walk the earth. Triceratops, with its 3 horns and massive frill, stood like a living fortress, ready to charge at predators with lethal force. Torosaurus, Styracosaurus, Pachyrhinosaurus. Each species developed unique patterns of horns and ornamentation, perhaps for defense, but just as likely for display. Imagine a field of them, their frills painted in bright colors by blood vessels pulsing beneath the skin, their heads lowered as they sparred in mock battles. Evolution had turned them into both warriors and performers. And of course, predators adapted to match. If the Jurassic gave us Allosaurus, the Cretaceous gave us Tyrannosaurus rex, towering, thick-skulled, jaw muscles strong enough to crush bone like dry twigs. T-Rex did not arrive until the very end of the Cretaceous, but when it did, it redefined the word predator. It was not just a hunter. It was a scavenger, a ruler, a keystone. Its bite force was among the strongest of any land animal in Earth's history, its teeth serrated like steak knives, perfectly designed to tear through flesh and pulverize bone. And yet, as monstrous as it seems, T-Rex was also a creature of complexity. It grew rapidly, had keen senses, and may even have cared for its young. Terrifying, yes, but also surprisingly tender in the private rhythms of its life. But T-Rex was not alone. The Cretaceous skies and plains were filled with predators just as strange. Velociraptor, smaller than Hollywood ever admitted, was no taller than a turkey, but armed with a curved sickle claw on each foot and the cunning of a pack hunter. Fossils in Mongolia show them frozen mid-battle with horned dinosaurs, locked in combat at the moment of death. Dromaeosaurs, their broader family, carried feathers, bright plumage, and perhaps even colors meant for display. Yes, the Cretaceous was feathered, far more than we used to imagine. Raptors, oviraptors, even tyrannosaurs may have carried feathers in some form. A reminder that birds are not just distant relatives of dinosaurs. They are dinosaurs, their living lineage still perched on our rooftops, singing at sunrise. Let's pause and feel this world. The air of the Cretaceous was warm, rich in carbon dioxide. Flowering plants appeared for the first time, changing ecosystems forever. Before, ferns, cycads, and conifers had ruled. Now, angiosperms spread their petals across fields and forests, offering fruits and nectar, reshaping diets and habitats. Insects followed suit. Bees evolved to match flowering plants, pollinating them and carrying their lineage forward. And where there were flowers, there was color. For the first time in Earth's history, landscapes may have bloomed in brilliant hues of reds, yellows, and purples, unseen by us but vivid in the eyes of insects and feathered dinosaurs. The Cretaceous was not only loud with roars and trumpets, it was bright, colorful, fragrant. And above, the skies transformed too. Pterosaurs, already ancient, reached their peak with giants like Quetzalcoatlus. Its wings stretched wider than a small plane, up to 35 feet across, its thin frame gliding silently over coastal plains. It may have stalked prey on land, striding like a stork, its long beak snapping up small dinosaurs or carrion. Imagine looking up at a clear sky and seeing not birds, but flying reptiles larger than any creature in the air today. The heavens belonged to them. Yet for all this grandeur, the Cretaceous world was fragile. Ecosystems were intricate, balanced between giants and the plants that fed them, between predators and the herds that sustained them. The inland seas of North America created strange, divided landscapes where creatures evolved in isolation on either side. On one shore, hadrosaurs flourished. On another, tyrannosaurs grew even larger. Global diversity soared, but with it came specialization. And specialization is a double-edged sword. It makes species efficient, but also vulnerable. A change in climate, a shift in food supply, and entire lineages can collapse. And changes were coming. The Earth's geology never sleeps. Volcanic activity in what is now India, the Deccan Traps, had already begun to spew lava and gases, altering the atmosphere. Sea levels shifted, climates fluctuated. It was as though the Earth itself was restless, foreshadowing what was to come. But for the dinosaurs living their daily lives, none of this mattered. They grazed, hunted, nested, migrated, fought, and displayed as if their world would last forever. Let's drift closer into their private lives. Fossils show us nesting colonies of hadrosaurs, entire fields where females laid eggs in orderly rows. We can almost picture them, carefully covering their nests with vegetation, waiting for the heat of the sun to incubate their young. In some cases, parents may have guarded hatchlings, leading them in small groups, teaching them to graze. A tender side, buried in stone. Meanwhile, predators honed strategies. Raptors may have hunted in coordinated bursts, distracting prey while another struck from behind. Tyrannosaurs, too, may have used ambush rather than long chases, hiding in forests before striking with a single devastating bite. And yet, not all predators were hunters. Some were opportunists. Oviraptors, once thought to be egg thieves, were later revealed to sometimes brood their own clutches, their skeletons found curled over nests in protective postures. Evolution had written countless variations, and we are only scratching the surface of their complexity. It is easy, from the distance of millions of years, to see dinosaurs only as monsters. Colossal, alien, terrifying. But in truth, they lived ordinary animal lives. They squabbled, they courted, they raised young, they endured seasons of plenty and seasons of scarcity. They were not aware of their grandeur. They were simply alive. And perhaps that is the most humbling reminder of all. As the Cretaceous rolled toward its final chapters, the giants were at their peak. Sauropods in South America remained immense. Ceratopsians in North America diversified wildly. Hadrosaurs trumpeted across plains. Tyrannosaurs stalked them with terrifying patience. Pterosaurs wheeled above. Birds, true birds, began to spread their wings in forests. The Earth was alive in a way it had never been before. And yet, time was running out. Because somewhere in space, unnoticed, a rock was on its way. A rock that would end this age of giants. But that moment is still ahead. For now, picture yourself in a Cretaceous meadow, the air warm, the flowers bright, the herds moving slowly across the horizon. Hear the calls of dinosaurs echoing, the wing beats of pterosaurs overhead, the rustle of small mammals in the undergrowth. The world is vibrant, alive, complete, and it has no idea it is living in the twilight of its reign. The day begins like any other, warm, humid, the chorus of insects weaving through the air like an endless lullaby. Herds of hadrosaurs move toward a watering hole. A tyrannosaurus pauses in the trees, its breath steaming in the morning light, and small mammals scurry in the undergrowth, alert but quiet, always careful not to draw the wrong kind of attention. It is, in every way, an ordinary day in the late Cretaceous. And yet, far above, something unimaginable is racing toward Earth. Unseen, unheard, unstoppable. The asteroid is roughly 10 kilometers across, a mountain of rock and metal traveling faster than a bullet, faster even than the eye could follow if it were visible. It has been tumbling through space for millions of years, a wanderer without purpose, until this moment, when gravity takes hold and directs it toward the Yucatan Peninsula, toward a shallow sea filled with life, coral reefs, ammonites, fish, mosasaurs, and a coastline rich with dinosaurs. When it enters the atmosphere, it does not drift down like a meteor we might see today. It tears the sky apart. The air in front of it compresses so violently that temperatures spike beyond imagination. The atmosphere ignites. Forests thousands of kilometers away feel the shock before the rock even touches ground. And then, in one instant, the asteroid slams into Earth. The energy released is beyond anything the planet has ever experienced in human terms, more than every nuclear weapon ever built, multiplied by millions. In that moment, the Earth itself convulses, the sea boils, the crust fractures, and a crater 180 kilometers wide, 20 kilometers deep, is gouged into the planet's surface. The Chicxulub crater, silent testimony carved into stone, the immediate aftermath is chaos. A blast wave races outward faster than sound, flattening forests, vaporizing anything living within hundreds of kilometers. Dinosaurs near the impact zone are erased instantly, their lives ending in a burst of heat and force too quick to comprehend. Entire coastal ecosystems vanish in seconds. But the damage doesn't stop there. Molten rock and vaporized earth are thrown high into the atmosphere, arcing around the globe before falling back as fiery rain. For hours after impact, the sky itself burns. Forests far from the crater ignite, flames racing across the land. The smell of resin, char, and scorched bone fills the air. Animals flee, but there is nowhere to go. Herds scatter, wings beat desperately, small creatures burrow, but the firestorm follows. Then comes the water. The impact displaces entire oceans. Shockwaves churn through the seas, sending tsunamis higher than skyscrapers racing across the coasts. In the western interior, seaway of North America, water surges inland, drowning plains, sweeping away herds and forests alike. Anything living near the shore, mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, fish, is tossed and shredded in a maelstrom of waves. But it is not only fire and flood that shape this apocalypse. It is the sky itself. Dust, soot, and aerosols are thrown into the atmosphere, shrouding the planet in darkness. The sun fades, day becomes twilight, twilight becomes night, and night stretches on, not for hours, not for days, but for months, even years. This impact winter is perhaps the cruelest part of the story. Plants wither without sunlight. Photosynthesis slows, then halts. Flowering plants, ferns, even conifers begin to die back. Fields that once bloomed with color turn to wastelands of gray. Herbivores starve, and when the herbivores fall, so do the predators. The intricate web of the Cretaceous collapses strand by strand. Imagine a hadrosaur still alive in the weeks after impact, its body thin, ribs showing, its herd scattered. It stumbles across a blackened forest looking for food. But the leaves are gone, the ground scorched, the streams filled with ash. A predator circles, but even the predator is gaunt, desperate. They face each other, but neither has strength for the fight. Hunger gnaws at both. It is a slow ending, not just a sudden one. A long unraveling of the great age of dinosaurs. And yet, not all life ends. Some creatures endure. Small mammals, burrowing deep into the earth, survive the fires. Crocodiles, lurking in rivers, endure as waters shield them from the worst of the heat. Birds, descendants of small feathered dinosaurs, find niches to carry on. Insects persist, feeding on decay. Seeds lie dormant, waiting for sunlight to return. In the midst of catastrophe, life clings stubbornly to existence. Scientists debate the exact sequence of these events. Was it the firestorms that killed most dinosaurs? The impact winter? Acid rain from the gases released by the strike? Or the volcanic eruptions of the Deccan Traps, which had already been pouring lava and gases into the air for thousands of years? Perhaps it was all of these, converging in one terrible symphony of extinction. But the outcome is the same. Within a few decades, 75% of Earth's species are gone. The seas lose ammonites, great shelled cephalopods that had survived since the Devonian. The skies lose pterosaurs, those rulers of flight for over 100 million years. The land loses nearly every non-avian dinosaur. The giants are gone. Let's pause for a moment and imagine the silence. No more herds rumbling across plains. No more roars echoing through forests. No more wings of pterosaurs casting shadows over lagoons. Instead, the earth becomes quiet. Still, birds chirp softly. Mammals rustle in the undergrowth. Reptiles bask by rivers. But the thunder of the Cretaceous has ended, and yet from this silence, a new world begins. With the dinosaurs gone, ecological space opens. Mammals, once small, secretive creatures, begin to spread into niches left behind. In time, they will grow larger, diversify, and eventually give rise to us. The asteroid that ended the reign of dinosaurs also paved the way for the rise of humans, a brutal irony carved into the timeline of deep history. It is easy to see this extinction as only destruction, and yes, it was, but it was also transition. One chapter ended, another began, and perhaps, if there is comfort here, it is this: extinction is not always the end. Sometimes it is the beginning of something new. Picture the crater cooling in the Yucatan, steam rising from shattered stone. Picture forests slowly regrowing, seeds sprouting in ash. Picture rivers carving new paths through landscapes torn by waves. And picture the first mammals creeping out from their burrows, blinking at a world transformed. The age of dinosaurs is over, but life has not surrendered. And so, as we drift at the edge of this story, we sit with the paradox: the death of giants, the survival of the small, the silence after thunder, and the slow beginning of a world that will one day be ours. The fires have burned out now. The tsunamis have retreated. The skies are still dim, choked with ash, but the first silence of a world without dinosaurs has settled over the land. It is heavy, almost unbearable. Imagine walking across a plain where only weeks ago, herds of triceratops clashed horns, where tyrannosaurs prowled with jaws that could snap bone. And now the bodies lie still, the ground scattered with ash, the air filled only with the distant crackle of dying fires. The dinosaurs are gone. Not in every corner, not in every moment, but their reign, their dominance has collapsed. The great thunder of the Cretaceous has faded into whispers. What remains are the survivors, small and unexpected, the quiet inheritors of a broken world. Let's drift through them gently, one by one. The mammals first of all. They had always been there, lurking in shadows, rarely more than the size of a rat or a possum. For over 100 million years, they had lived under the weight of giants, hiding in burrows, foraging at night, careful not to draw attention. And now, suddenly, the giants are gone. The mammals emerge cautiously, noses twitching in the ash-laden air. They scurry between charred trunks, slip through burrows, pick at seeds and insects. It is not triumph, not yet, only survival. But survival is enough, because in time these small furred creatures will become the rulers of the earth. Crocodiles endure too. Their world has changed, but their strategy remains the same. They sink into rivers and lakes, half submerged, eyes watching. They are patient, as they have always been. They can wait through famine, slow their bodies, endure long stretches without food. The fires and darkness do not bother them as much as they bother others. And so the crocodiles continue, unbroken, ancient guardians of an age now gone. Then there are the birds, descendants of small feathered dinosaurs. They flutter from tree to tree, thinner now, many species lost, but some remain. Their wings carry them over the ruins, their songs faint, fragile, but real. It is almost poetic that even as the great non-avian dinosaurs vanish, one branch of their family takes flight into the future. Every sparrow, every raven, every hawk alive today is a living echo of the Cretaceous. But for most of the world, the next years are brutal. The sky is dark, the sun hidden behind layers of soot and dust. The earth cools, plants die, food chains collapse. Many creatures that survived the first blast now starve in the long night that follows. It is an age of hunger, an age of thinning, an age of silence. And yet, slowly, gently, light begins to return. The ash settles, the skies clear, and sunlight once again warms the earth. Plants sprout in blackened soil. Ferns rise first, covering the scarred ground in green. Then trees return, forests regrow, rivers carve new paths through ash plains. Life, stubborn as ever, begins to weave itself back together. This period is sometimes called the Paleocene recovery, a time when ecosystems stitched themselves anew. It did not happen overnight. It took thousands, even millions of years. But bit by bit, niches once held by dinosaurs are filled by new creatures. The mammals diversify. Some remain small, scurrying in undergrowth, while others grow larger. A few begin to resemble early primates. Others start to branch toward hoofed animals, predators, herbivores. In less than 10 million years, the first true large mammals roam the earth. Not as large as dinosaurs yet, but the seeds of the future are planted. Birds flourish too. Freed from the shadow of their great cousins, they spread into countless forms. Some grow large, towering terror birds that dominate South America for millions of years. Others remain small, agile and quick, filling niches left empty in forests and wetlands. But for all this renewal, the earth still carries scars. The Chicxulub crater remains, slowly weathering, filling with water, but always present. A wound in the planet's skin, reminder of the day the sky fell. And fossils of the dead still lie in the rocks, layer upon layer of sudden endings. Ammonites, pterosaurs, triceratops, tyrannosaurs, all caught in the same thin line of clay, a line rich with iridium, the cosmic fingerprint of the asteroid. That line, found in cliffs around the world, is history's bookmark, the mark of extinction and of transition. Let's pause here, because there is something strangely comforting in this cycle. Yes, the dinosaurs are gone, but life continues. Yes, an asteroid ended an age, but it also opened the way for another. Without that catastrophe, mammals might never have risen. Primates might never have evolved. And we, sitting here tonight, might not exist at all. In a strange, ironic way, we owe our existence to that day of fire, and yet the ghosts of the dinosaurs remain, in bones turned to stone, in the songs of birds, in the shapes of reptiles basking in the sun, even in our imagination, stories of dragons, monsters, giants. Perhaps they are echoes, faint memories of the age when such beasts really did walk the earth. As we drift further into this quiet aftermath, picture the world as it was then. The forests regrowing, the rivers running dark with silt, the small mammals creeping from their burrows, the first green shoots pushing through ash. A world remade, not as it was, but as it would become. And so, the age of mammals begins. The thunder of dinosaurs has ended, but a new drumbeat rises, slow and steady. Paws on the earth, wings in the air, voices in the undergrowth, a planet healing and a story continuing. The silence after the asteroid did not last forever. The earth, always stubborn, always restless, began to pulse with life again. And at the heart of that renewal were the mammals. Once small, furtive creatures scurrying in shadows, now stepping cautiously into the light. Imagine the scene, a landscape still scarred by fire, forests returning in patches, rivers choked with silt, and in the undergrowth, small furred bodies darting between ferns. They are not impressive yet. They are no tyrannosaurs, no triceratops, but they are alive, and that is enough. The earliest mammals of the Paleocene, roughly 66 to 56 million years ago, were modest. Many no bigger than mice, shrews, or possums. They fed on insects, seeds, and small fruits. But already, variation began to stir. Some grew slightly larger, adapting to eat tougher plants. Others developed sharper teeth for meat. Some took to the trees, clambering up branches for safety. In the absence of dinosaurs, niches opened like empty rooms in a grand abandoned house, and the mammals began to explore them. Within a few million years, the first experiments in size appeared. Creatures like Pantalambda, a strange, squat animal with a heavy body and plant-crushing teeth about the size of a sheep. It waddled through the early forests, not graceful, but filling a role once held by smaller herbivorous dinosaurs. And then there were predators. Mesonyx, wolf-like but with hooves instead of claws, a hunter of the new age. It padded across riverbanks, snapping up fish or scavenging carcasses. Strange, awkward, but effective. And then, high in the canopy, the ancestors of primates stirred, tiny, grasping hands, forward-facing eyes. They lived among the leaves, feeding on fruits and insects, their tails curling for balance. They were not us, not yet, but the spark of our story glimmered faintly in their movements. The Paleocene world was different from the Cretaceous. The air was warming, the forests spreading, tropical and subtropical plants flourished, palms and broad-leafed trees forming thick jungles. Flowers, which had begun to rise in the Cretaceous, now dominated landscapes. Their colors and scents attracted insects, and those insects in turn attracted mammals. The old reptilian world of cycads and conifers gave way to a greener, more fragrant earth, and with plants came pollinators. Bees buzzed, butterflies flitted, beetles burrowed, and mammals too joined the cycle. Some fed on fruits and spread seeds in their droppings. Others dug burrows that aerated soil. In subtle ways, mammals began to weave themselves into the fabric of ecosystems. But make no mistake, this was not a calm idyll. It was a world still haunted by extinction. Many groups rose quickly, only to vanish just as quickly. Evolution was experimenting furiously, and failure was common. For every line that thrived, another disappeared, leaving only faint fossils behind. Let's pause and float through some of the stranger creatures of this age. There was Coryphodon, a semi-aquatic beast that looked like a mashup of a hippo and a tapir. Broad, heavy, with short tusks, it wallowed in rivers about 60 million years ago. Not elegant, but solid, a symbol of the new mammal bulk. Then there was Andrewsarchus, though it came slightly later, in the Eocene. Still worth mentioning. A predator with a skull nearly a meter long, its jaws capable of crushing bone. For a time, it may have been the largest land carnivore, not as sleek as a tiger, but terrifying in its own right. And the terror birds. Yes, the dinosaurs were gone, but some of their cousins, the birds, rose to fill the predator's role. In South America especially, massive, flightless birds called phorusrhacids thundered across plains. Up to 3 meters tall, with hooked beaks like axes. They were the tyrannosaurs of their time, chasing down smaller mammals with startling speed. Imagine a landscape where your worst nightmare is not a wolf, but a bird taller than you, sprinting after you across scrubland. But let's not lose the thread, because while mammals grew, diversified, and sometimes frightened each other, something else was happening, something quiet, almost invisible. Brain size, intelligence. The early primates, the shrew-like insectivores, the tree dwellers, their brains were proportionally larger than most reptiles. They experimented with social living, with problem-solving, with flexibility. In the long run, this subtle shift mattered as much as size or teeth. The great beasts might dominate for a while, but the clever ones would endure. Meanwhile, the Earth itself was changing. The continents drifted further apart. The Atlantic widened. India sped northward on a collision course with Asia. This slow-motion crash would eventually lift the Himalayas skyward, but in the Paleocene, it was just beginning. Volcanoes rumbled, mountains rose, seas shifted. Every change in geography reshaped ecosystems, moving rivers, isolating populations, forcing adaptations. Evolution and geology danced together, step by step, and in the skies, birds continued to thrive. Not just terror birds, but small songbirds, early ducks, and waders. They filled the air with calls, their wings carrying them where mammals could not go. In this way, the legacy of the dinosaurs lived on above the new mammal Earth. Now, here's the irony. The asteroid that ended the dinosaurs is often painted as pure destruction. But in truth, it was also creation. By sweeping away the giants, it cleared room for mammals. By darkening the skies, it changed vegetation, which in turn shaped diets, bodies, and behaviors. Without that catastrophe, mammals might have remained small, scurrying creatures forever. Instead, they inherited the earth, and yet the ghosts of the Cretaceous lingered. Fossils of Triceratops, Tyrannosaurs, and Hadrosaurs still jutted from cliffs, reminders of what had been. And in those bones, perhaps mammals felt no awe, no recognition. But we, looking back, can see the continuity. One world ending, another beginning. Let's imagine the end of a Paleocene day. The forests thick, humid, buzzing with insects. Small mammals forage in the undergrowth. Larger ones wade through rivers. terror birds stalk through grasslands. The sky glows red with sunset, shadows stretch long, and in burrows, nests, and hollows, life curls up to rest. It is not a peaceful world, but it is alive, and that after extinction is miracle enough. The silence of the Paleocene gave way to a new symphony in the Eocene, roughly 56 to 34 million years ago. It was a time when the Earth leaned toward warmth, when tropical forests stretched almost to the poles, and when mammals began to experiment with shapes, sizes, and lifestyles so bizarre that if you stumbled into an Eocene meadow today, you might swear you'd fallen into a dream. Picture it: forests dripping with vines, canopies alive with color and sound, rivers swollen with rain, and coastlines teeming with life. The great inland seas of North America shimmer under a heavy sky, and even in places we know today as Arctic tundra, palms and crocodiles bask lazily in the heat. This was no ice age. This was a greenhouse Earth, lush, strange, and unforgiving. And in this world, mammals took the stage with confidence. Let's begin with the giants. One of the strangest was Indricotherium, sometimes called Paraceratherium, though it arrived toward the end of the Eocene into the Oligocene. Imagine a rhinoceros without a horn, stretched to impossible size, nearly 5 meters tall at the shoulder, longer than a school bus, and weighing up to 20 tons. It grazed on leaves, stripping trees bare with a long neck and nimble lips, the largest land mammal to ever live. No dinosaur towered here anymore, but mammals were beginning to rival their bulk. But the giants weren't alone. In South America, isolated by oceans, evolution spun its own tapestry. There were Pyrotherium, strange elephant-like creatures with short trunks, stomping across wetlands. There were massive rodents, ancestors of capybaras, swelling to sizes bigger than bears, and predatory marsupials, saber-toothed and terrifying, prowling across jungles. Meanwhile, in the oceans, a revolution stirred. The ancestors of whales, the Archaeocetes, were stepping away from land and into the water. Creatures like Pachycetus, with long jaws and slender legs, still walked along riversides but hunted fish like crocodiles. Then came Ambulocetus, literally the walking whale, a beast that swam through estuaries with powerful limbs, half crocodile, half mammal, lunging at prey. And eventually, Basilosaurus, an apex predator of the seas, long and serpentine, stretching 18 meters. It was technically a whale, though it looked more like a monstrous sea serpent. With teeth sharp enough to shear flesh, it dominated the oceans, the tyrannosaur of water. The irony? Whales began as land mammals, cousins of hoofed animals, and ended as rulers of the sea. The earth, as always, delights in irony. And then there were the primates. The story edges closer to us here. In the dense forests of Africa and Asia, small, lemur-like primates evolved, grasping hands, stereoscopic vision, brains quietly expanding. They leapt across branches, foraging for fruit and insects, living in social groups. Among them were adipids and omomyids, early relatives of modern primates, splitting into two great lineages, one toward lemurs and lorises, the other toward monkeys and apes. Without fanfare, in the shadows of vines and trees, the groundwork for humanity itself was being laid. Now, let's float gently into some of the stranger creatures of this age. There was Wintotherium, a bizarre herbivore with 6 horn-like protrusions on its skull and massive saber-like canine teeth. Despite its frightening face, It browsed peacefully on vegetation. Yet one look at its skull and you'd think nature had been doodling absent-mindedly, stacking horns where they didn't belong. There were the brontosaurs, relatives of horses and rhinos, but with huge forked horns sprouting from their snouts. Herds of them wandered the plains, their silhouettes strange and imposing against the horizon. And then the entelodonts, often called hell pigs, though they were closer to hippos than swine. With massive jaws, long legs, and a reputation as bone-crunching omnivores, they roamed like nightmares. Scavengers and hunters both. They would persist long after the Eocene, but their shadow begins here. Let's not forget the birds. The terror birds of South America thundered across landscapes, their beaks crashing down with lethal force. In Europe, giant flightless birds stalked the undergrowth. Some grew taller than humans, a reminder that the age of dinosaurs had not fully yielded to mammals. The avian airs still ruled certain corners of the Earth. The Earth's climate itself shaped much of this. The early Eocene began with a spike known as the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. Carbon flooded the atmosphere, temperatures soared, and forests expanded. Palm trees grew in what is now Wyoming. Crocodiles basked in the Arctic Circle. It was, in every sense, a tropical world, and yet the warmth carried consequences. Some species flourished in the lush heat, while others perished, unable to adapt. Shifts in vegetation altered diets, altered teeth, altered bodies. Horses, for example, first appeared in this age. Tiny dog-sized creatures like Eohippus, tiptoeing on forest floors, browsing on soft leaves. They were delicate, graceful, and worlds apart from the towering steeds of medieval knights. Evolution would stretch and reshape them over millions of years. But here they began. Cultural historians often call the Eocene the dawn of modern animals, because many familiar lineages trace their roots here. Bats first spread their wings in twilight skies, their delicate bones preserved in fine-grained sediments. Rodents diversified wildly, nibbling through forests with ever-growing incisors. Even elephants began their lineage here, small and strange, nothing like the tusked giants of later ages. And the predators. Oh, the predators. Hyenodon rose in Asia and Europe, an apex hunter with massive jaws, crushing prey with a force that rivaled any big cat. Andrewsarchus, with its immense skull, prowled coasts, scavenging and hunting in equal measure. The ecosystems of the Eocene were balanced on a knife edge, each creature carving out its role in the web of survival. But perhaps the strangest element of all was how familiar and unfamiliar this world feels. On one hand, there are forests, rivers, plains, and seas, birds singing, mammals raising young, predators stalking prey. It is recognizably Earth, and yet the cast is wrong. No deer, but brontosaurs. No dogs, but entelodonts. No whales as we know them, but basilosaurs slithering like dragons through the seas. It's a dream of Earth in disguise, wearing a mask almost, but still distinctly itself. As the Eocene wore on, continents continued their slow waltz. India pressed harder into Asia, lifting mountains. South America drifted further apart, incubating its own unique menagerie. Australia began to slip into isolation, where marsupials flourished in secret. Evolution was not just biological, it was geographical, sculpting futures through collision and separation. The end of the Eocene loomed with another climate shift. Cooling began. Glaciers crept toward the poles, forests shrank back, grasslands began to expand. Some species vanished, unable to cope. Others adapted, paving the way for Oligocene forms. But before that decline, the Eocene stood as Earth's grand experiment in mammalian exuberance. A carnival of forms, a riot of adaptations, a moment when nature tried everything and asked no one's permission. Imagine yourself there, at dusk in an Eocene forest. The air is thick, buzzing with insects, fragrant with resin. Above you, tiny primates leap through branches, their eyes catching the last glimmers of light. On the ground, Wintotherium browses slowly, its saber teeth flashing as it pulls down leaves. In the distance, an entelodont prowls, its jaws snapping at the bones of some unfortunate victim. And beyond the tree line, the call of a terror bird echoes like a drumbeat, chilling, ancient. This was Earth 50 million years ago, surreal, unsettling, but alive in ways both alien and familiar. A chapter in our story, written long before our names existed, yet carrying threads that would eventually weave into us. The warmth of the Eocene began to fade, slowly at first, like a candle guttering in the corner of a room, and then with sharper gusts of cold that swept across the continents. The Earth was rearranging itself as it always does. And by the time the Oligocene dawned around 34 million years ago, the world felt different, leaner, harsher, and in some ways more familiar to our modern eyes. The Oligocene is sometimes called the Age of Transition, not as lush and surreal as the Eocene, not yet as dramatic as the Ice Ages, but pivotal all the same. The great rainforests shrank back, replaced by open woodlands and the first stretches of grassland. This change was subtle at first, patches of grasses spreading like green experiments across the plains, but it would rewrite the story of life forever. Because grass is not just food, it is an engineer of ecosystems. Its silica-rich blades wore down the teeth of animals, forcing new kinds of dentition to evolve. Herbivores that had once nibbled leaves in shaded forests now had to grind endlessly on abrasive stalks. And so, in this quiet moment of transition, the teeth of mammals sharpened into the tools of survival. Flat, ridged molars, high-crowned grinders. These were the adaptations that would let horses, antelope, and cattle-like creatures thrive. Let's pause here, because the horse deserves its own quiet spotlight. Remember Eohippus, the dainty forest browser of the Eocene? By the Oligocene, its descendants were lengthening legs, slimming bodies, and running faster. The toes that once spread softly on the forest floor began to fuse, evolving toward hooves. The horse family was preparing, unknowingly, for the open plains to come. It is strange to think that something so iconic to human history, cavalry, chariots, fields plowed under hoofbeats, began as a trembling little mammal trying not to be eaten in a shady grove. Evolution has a wicked sense of humor. And then there were the predators. As prey animals stretched out their legs, predators had no choice but to match them. Speed became currency. Cats began to appear, not quite the lions and tigers of today, but nimble prototypes, learning to sprint and ambush. The great creodonts, once the terror of the mammal world, began to fade, replaced by carnivores more familiar to us. The early dogs, bears, and cats. The Oligocene also birthed some oddities. Andrewsarchus, a mammal with a skull over 3 feet long, roamed Asian coastlines, crushing bones and scavenging carcasses. Brontotheras dwindled and disappeared, unable to keep up with the ecological shifts. And high above, birds continued their reign. Giant raptors and ground-dwelling terror birds still stalking the unwary. In South America, isolated from the northern continents, evolution ran its own wild experiment. Strange hoofed mammals with no counterparts elsewhere, litopterns and notongulates, thrived in forms that looked almost familiar but not quite. Imagine a camel that isn't a camel, A horse that isn't a horse. Predator niches were filled by marsupials, saber-toothed and cunning. When North and South America finally collided millions of years later, this experiment would come crashing down. But for now, the southern continent hummed with its own peculiar music. The seas were no less transformed. The ancient serpentine whales of the Eocene gave way to more streamlined forms. Baleen whales began their rise, straining krill from the oceans with vast jaws. The rhythm of the seas shifted from predators like Basilosaurus to great filter feeders and their kin. And seals and sea lions, the pinnipeds, first waddled awkwardly from the shore into the surf, beginning their double life between land and ocean. Meanwhile, high in the branches, another story was unfolding. A story that would eventually lead to us. Primates had already taken root in the Eocene, but the Oligocene gave them more definition. In the lush, shrinking forests of Africa and Asia, new lineages split and stretched. The ancestors of monkeys and apes diverged here, adapting to the demands of canopy life. Some grew tails for balance, some lost them. Brains began to swell, eyes turned more forward, hands grasped more tightly. These were not humans, not even close. But the scaffolding of humanity was being erected one gene, one adaptation at a time. Let's float into the Miocene now. That long stretch of time from 23 to 5 million years ago. If the Oligocene was a transition, the Miocene was a rehearsal for the world we recognize today. Grasslands spread wide, forests pulled back, and mammals galloped, sprinted, and leapt across the open country. This was the true age of running. Horses grew taller and faster. Antelope-like creatures fanned across the plains. Rhinoceroses spread in great variety. Some small, some gigantic. In fact, one of the largest land mammals of all time, Paraceratherium, the same giant rhino we glimpsed before, lumbered across Asia during this time, pulling down branches with its elongated neck, a tower of flesh and bone unmatched by anything alive today. And then there were the apes. The Miocene has been called the Age of Apes for good reason. In Africa, Europe, and Asia, apes flourished in countless forms. Some dangled gracefully from branches, some lumbered heavily on the ground, some experimented with upright posture. Proconsul in Africa, Dryopithecus in Europe, Civipithecus in Asia, each one a piece of the puzzle, each one carrying traits that would echo into the great apes we know today. And somewhere in these forests and savannas, the lineage that would lead to humans began to crystallize. Predators adapted alongside them. The first true big cats prowled the Miocene, saber-toothed cats, not yet the famous Smilodon, but their forerunners, sliced through prey with teeth like daggers. Early hyenas laughed and crunched bones. Dogs diversified, some small and fox-like, others large and wolfish. The predator-prey arms race had reached a new tempo, one that still plays out on the savannas of Africa today. Let's not forget the oceans. By the Miocene, dolphins and modern whales had emerged. Great sharks, including the legendary megalodon, ruled the seas. Imagine a shark over 15 meters long, jaws wide enough to swallow you whole, a relic of prehistoric terror that prowled the coasts for millions of years. When megalodons sliced through the waves, even whales learned to fear. And as always, the climate steered the dance. The earth cooled steadily through the Miocene. Grasslands expanded further, deserts began to form, and ice crept closer to the poles. This forced species to adapt or vanish. Those who could run did. Those who could graze flourished. And those who clung to older ways found themselves cornered by time. It is tempting to see inevitability here, as though the Miocene was simply winding up to produce us. But evolution is never destiny. It is chance, improvisation, opportunity. If one branch had snapped differently, if one climate shift had lingered longer, perhaps another species, not ours, would be reading the stars tonight. Still, the Miocene gave humanity its foundation. By the end of this epic, forests of East Africa sheltered apes already experimenting with upright posture, already tinkering with hands and tools. The road to humanity was opening, not with a bang, but with the quiet crunch of grass underfoot. So let's pause and breathe here. The Oligocene and Miocene were not filled with the drama of an asteroid strike, but their transformations were just as profound. They re-sculpted Earth from the greenhouse paradise of the dinosaurs' wake into a cooler, harsher, more dynamic planet. They gave us grasslands, predators with speed, prey with endurance, oceans with whales and sharks locked in rivalry, and forests. The Miocene world faded slowly, like the light of a long summer day slipping into autumn. And the Pliocene arrived. Around 5 million years ago, the Earth was cooling, tilting itself toward the coming ice ages. The continents were nearly in the positions we know today. South America and North America finally collided, linking two worlds that had been separated for tens of millions of years. The Isthmus of Panama rose up, a strip of land that looks small on a map but rewrote entire oceans and ecosystems. Currents shifted, climates hardened, and the Great Migration began. North American animals streamed south carrying horses, camels, saber-toothed cats, and bears into South America. In return, strange South American forms, giant sloths, armored glyptodons, and terror birds wandered north. It was called the Great American Interchange. And it was as chaotic as it sounds. Predators and prey met species they had never seen before. Some flourished, some collapsed. Evolution loves a mashup, but it doesn't hand out mercy. The grasslands that had been expanding since the Oligocene now stretched even further. Endless plains of tough grasses rolled across continents. Herds of grazers thundered through them, antelope, horses, rhinoceroses. And predators sharpened themselves on this abundance. Lions and cheetahs perfected their speed. Saber-toothed cats perfected their killing strikes. Wolves learned to hunt in packs. The open plains were a stage for endurance and coordination, a rehearsal for the future African savannas. But the Pliocene wasn't just about animals racing across grasslands. Something else was stirring in the trees of Africa. Among the apes that had thrived during the Miocene, one branch was inching toward a peculiar fate. They were small, bipedal apes, creatures like Australopithecus. They still climbed trees, but they also walked upright. Their hands were free for carrying. Their brains, though still small, were expanding. They didn't know it, of course. They were just another primate experimenting with survival. But from their footprints in the volcanic ash of Laetoli to the bones they left in riverbeds, we see the outlines of ourselves beginning to appear. The Pliocene drifted into the Pleistocene about 2.6 million years ago, and here the world took on a rhythm we can still feel, the drumbeat of the ice ages. Glaciers advanced, retreated, advanced again, carving valleys, sculpting mountains, and pushing animals into migrations they could never escape. The Pleistocene was a theater of giants. Let's take a slow walk among them. Imagine the steppe of Ice Age Eurasia. The wind is sharp. Snow crunches underfoot. Ahead, a herd of woolly mammoths trudges together, their shaggy coats bristling with frost. Tusks curl like ivory scythes. Calves walk close to their mothers, shielded from the bitter wind. These mammoths were not just beasts. They were civilizations of fur and bone, wandering in groups that carried memory and ritual. Nearby, woolly rhinoceroses huddle, their horns lowered against predators. Across the grasslands, herds of bison stretch to the horizon. and stalking at the edge of the herds, cats with teeth like sabers crouch low, waiting for weakness. Let's shift continents. In South America, sloths the size of elephants lumber through scrubland, pulling down branches with their long claws. Armored glyptodons, walking tanks of bone, graze placidly, their domed shells glinting under the sun. Terror birds, those relics of an earlier age, still stride on long legs, striking prey with axe-like beaks. In Australia, the marsupial experiment reached its climax. Diprotodon, a wombat the size of a car, chewed on eucalyptus leaves. Thylacoleo, the marsupial lion, slashed with bone-sharpened teeth. Kangaroos twice the size of modern ones bounded across plains, and giant monitor lizards, close kin of the Komodo dragon, patrolled the edges of rivers. Everywhere on Earth, the Pleistocene was crowded with titans. Even the oceans roared with them. Whales surged through icy waters. Sea cows grazed in kelp forests. Seals, walruses, and penguins flourished along coasts. And sharks, smaller than megalodon, yes, but still deadly, circled in shadows. The first humans, Homo habilis, appeared in Africa a little over 2 million years ago. They were tool makers, chipping stone into edges that could cut meat and scrape hides. They were scavengers at first, slipping in after lions and hyenas had eaten their fill, cracking bones for marrow. But even then, something was different. They carried memory. They shared food. They taught their children. The spark was faint, but it was there. Over the next million years, that spark grew. Homo erectus rose, tall and long-limbed, striding out of Africa into Asia and Europe. They carried fire. They hunted in coordinated groups. They left behind not only tools but hearths, the blackened stones of ancient camps. Their shadows still stretch across caves and riversides, whispering of the first steps towards civilization. The giants of the Ice Age must have seemed eternal to them. Imagine standing on a ridge with your small band of hunters, looking down at mammoths grazing, at bison churning the grass, at predators watching with golden eyes. You would feel small, fragile, yet strangely powerful, because your kind carried something no mammoth or cat could match: the ability to imagine, to plan, to whisper across generations. And yet, as humans spread, the giants faltered. Climate pushed them first, glaciers grinding down their habitats, warm periods shrinking them back. Then humans pressed harder, with spears, with fire, with clever ambushes. Mammoths fell, giant sloths toppled, saber-toothed cats vanished. One by one, the great beasts slipped into silence until the Pleistocene theaters were empty. This is where the story begins to feel close to home, because when you step outside tonight, under the quiet stars, the world you see is the world left behind after the giants fell. The forests, the plains, the seas, they still carry their shadows. We feel them in myths of dragons, in tales of monsters, in the awe we still feel when we see elephants or whales. We remember in some deep way that we once shared the earth with creatures bigger than imagination. And here's the irony: we call them prehistoric, as if they are long gone, sealed away in some separate chapter. But their blood still runs in us. In our bones are fragments of Neanderthal DNA. In our crops and livestock are the domesticated descendants of wild Pleistocene creatures. In our stories, from cave paintings to bedtime tales, we keep bringing the giants back because they never really left. So as we drift slowly toward the end of this long journey, take a moment to breathe. Picture the mammoths trudging across a frozen plain. Picture the giant sloths swaying under their own weight. Picture the first humans lifting a torch into the darkness. That was our world. That was the world before cities, before kings, before history wrote itself in ink instead of footprints. And let's close softly. The giants are gone, but their shadows remain in our myths, in our bones, even in our DNA. When you lie down to sleep tonight, know that you are part of that story, that the air you breathe once filled the lungs of mammoths, that the stars you see tonight were the same ones that shone down on saber-toothed cats and wandering bands of humans huddled around a fire. Time is vast and we are brief, but in our briefness we carry it all. So let the night take you now. Close your eyes, drift gently, and dream of the world before humans, when the earth itself was crowded with wonders. Because in dreams, the mammoths still walk, the dinosaurs still thunder, and the seas still hide monsters. And in dreams, time folds, and the past is never truly gone.